Good evening and welcome to our Stand Up for Your Rights webinar, focusing on the university experience for prospective and current students who are blind or who have low vision. My name is Rini and I'll be your facilitator tonight. Um, uh, and we'll be going through, sorry about that. My lovely CEO just came and said goodbye to me, so I just got a little bit distracted just there. Tonight, we have got a lot of useful information to get through. We're going to be going through the university experience and things that you might want to consider if you are a student who is blind or low vision, what you might want to consider around navigating the experience before you enter university, the enrollment process, tips and tricks that you might want to consider if you are studying and you do come across a barrier at university, which unfortunately is still highly likely. We're also going to be looking into some of the research conducted by Vision Australia that looked into the online barriers experienced by students who are blind or who have low vision. I'm really, really excited to introduce our panelists tonight. We've got three incredible panelists, Bruce Maguire, Doug Magin and Jane Brint, individuals who have lots of experience in the education system as former students, as well as employment in that space as well. And I'll now get them to introduce themselves tonight. Bruce.
Thanks, Rini, and good evening, everyone. It's Bruce Maguire. My title at Vision Australia is Lead Policy Advisor, and next Monday I will have been at Vision Australia for 12 years. I'm totally blind, and going back to 1975, I've had numerous periods of university study between then and now, and I've observed many changes in the university sector during that time.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Doug.
Thank you, Rini. As Rini said, my name is Doug McGinn. I'm one of the disability advisors at the University of Tasmania. I am blind myself. I use JAWS software and Zoom text on Magnification 7. So I'm certainly very used to the issues of using assistive software. I work as a disability advisor, and all of the universities that we're talking about tonight will have a disability service similar to what I work in. Thanks, Rini.
Thank you so much, Doug. Jane.
Thank you, Rini. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jane Bruce, and I'm here as a not too distant university graduate. I am both vision and hearing impaired. I'm blind in my right eye and deaf in my left ear. I have attended 3 different universities and have full qualifications from those universities, so I have quite a bit of experience in the sector. After university, I did a graduate program at Vision Australia, and now I'm working as Policy Officer for Blind Citizens Australia.
Thank you so much, Jane. We've got a very impressive panelist tonight. I can see we've got some people joining us right now for our Stand Up for Your Rights Stand Up for Your Rights University Students webinar. If you are joining us tonight, it's a very interactive session. So if you've got any questions around the student experience, please send them through either using your chat function, which is located in the webinar, or you can email them through to campaigns@visionaustralia.org. That email address again is campaigns@visionaustralia.org. Let's get started now by looking firstly at what we should consider doing before we get to university. And in this section, we're going to be looking at utilising the NDIS, as well as what sort of skills that you'd like to consider when equipping yourself before you start university. Now, Doug, we know that the NDIS is a huge system and it's a really important service available to the community. Can you tell us from your experience how people can use the NDIS to support their university needs?
Thanks, Randy. Certainly the NDIS has been around for a few years now, but we're still getting used to it. Certainly a really important tip is for students and applicants, and when I say students, I'm talking about maybe when you're in year 10s and 11 or 12 even, that's the time to start thinking about your plan for university, and certainly to talk to your coordinator of services or your local area coordinator about what equipment or training or transport you may require to fully participate at university. So certainly it's never too early to think about what could be contained within your NDIS plan. Now, the services that the universities provide, that hasn't really changed over the past 5 years since the NDIS has been apparent. It's been the same for the past 20 years. But the NDIS will certainly cover some of the gaps that the university doesn't provide support for. For example, transport to and from. Sometimes the NDIS will assist with such. Things like equipment at home for the whole of life experience, and other things that, training of certain software and things like that. So certainly there are some gaps where the NDIS will assist, and probably the most important part is to get in as early as possible. And if I can just mention one thing, ADCET, which is the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training. So if you Google ADCET and look for their pre-planning toolkit, there's a very good toolkit in there for applicants with vision impairment or applicants who are blind, and it gives really good details on the gaps that universities don't cover and where applicants to the university may want to include within their NDS plans. Thanks, Rennie.
Thanks, Doug. That was really comprehensive. And Jane, what are some of the skills a student should consider equipping themselves with, particularly before they even started university?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few things I think that a student who's attending university, especially for the first time, can do. The two major skills that I think are really important for someone to have coming in are orientation and mobility skills. So getting a specialist involved from Vision Australia, getting help to learn your way around the campus, learning your transport routes, and it's really important to do that before class start, because it will make it much easier for you coming into the first day. The second thing I think that you can do is get technology skills. I came into university with the higher education bursary from Vision Australia, so I had some assistive technology, but then it was really important to get the training to learn how to use those devices before university started. So I think they're two major things that a student can do prior to starting university.
Thanks, Jane. Bruce, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, thanks, Rennie. I think it's really important for students to be thinking about the kinds of tasks that you might want to do at university. And although university support services do assist, there are still times when you want to be as independent as possible. And one of the things that I know from my experience at university is the importance of being able to take print documents and convert them into a form that you can read. Although an increasing amount of material now is available in electronic format, university libraries contain hundreds of thousands of print books that will never be available in an electronic format. So if you need a print book from a library to do to assist with an assignment or research or whatever, then being able to take that print book, scan it into your computer using a flatbed scanner, convert it using optical character recognition software such as OmniPage, and then being able to read that book using your say screen reader or screen enlargement software can be really important, and I think that's a skill that all students should really avail themselves of.
Thanks so much, Bruce. It really does sound like what I'm hearing from you, as well as Jane and Doug, is around the importance of being proactive and how we would want to even start from a year 10 age to start thinking about what kind of tools that we need, how we go about finding that pre-planning tool that we can start mapping that out. Now, Bruce or even Doug, what happens if you are in that pre-planning stage and you've got a really good idea of what you need to do, but you realise that your situation changes? Now, how easy or difficult is it to update that plan?
Well, thanks, Rennie. most university students sort of change their plans at various points along the way, and students who are blind or have low vision are no different. The important thing is always to talk to disability advisors, talk to university lecturers in the course or the subjects that you want to change to or are thinking of changing to get an idea of what's going to be involved. Preparation is really the key, or one of the keys to success at university for all students, and particularly for those who are blind or have low vision.
Thanks so much. Now, I'd like to move on to the next section, and that is preparing for enrollment. And in this section, we'll be looking at how you might want to go about making this part of the process a bit easier for yourself. Now, Jane, you're probably one of the most recent graduates from university, so I'm really keen to understand from your perspective, how did you go about the enrollment process?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, first and foremost, to be quite organised coming into the enrolment process. So one of the things to have is any documentation from school, particularly, or recent university studies around your learning needs and around the reasonable adjustments that have been made in the past. So be that for exams or assignments, things that have enabled you to do your studies. So once you get that paperwork together, I think it's really important then to go to student services, to a disability advisor or whatever that particular service is called at your university with that information, and pre-enrollment to have the discussion about how to actually effectively navigate the enrollment process, because there might be things like enrolling for tutorials that they are able to assist with. And then when it came to the actual enrolment itself, so going around the campus, perhaps getting things like student cards or, physically signing up for things, I took along a support person, and I found that made it a bit easier to navigate. So more than just me with hearing the information that I needed, and together we were able to make that process quite easy.
And I think we've touched on it already a little bit, Jane, and perhaps I'll open this one up to the floor. That's really important, what you just mentioned around making it really clear around your needs for reasonable adjustment. Now, we've had a question come through in the pre-registration that looked into how you would go about if you were doing more of a practical class, music, dance, drama perhaps. How would you go about articulating your needs for those kind of more practical courses? And I'd like you to keep in mind, let's even add another second layer to that question, what happens if you're facing some resistance?
Yeah, sure. Oh, sorry. Go, Doug.
Yep, Doug.
Okay, certainly research and reasonable timeframes is important. So if you were doing dance or if you were doing biology, it's still really important to come and see staff, preferably before the terms or semesters start, because there will be some issues possibly with regard to participation in laboratories. You may need some extra orientation. You may need some extra instruction on safety within the practicals, and it's important to talk them over with staff. Now, if it's access to material, then certainly speaking to staff as soon as possible, explaining to them why you need that material as early as possible. You may need to get that converted into a different format so that you can read it more effectively. And if there is any barriers or resistance, certainly checking with the staff member first before proceeding to the disability advisor, I think is always a good thing, and hopefully it can be rectified at that level. Obviously, all institutions would have different processes, but certainly checking with the staff member first, the disability service. If you're feeling at that stage, really, that you're still meeting a lot of resistance, it is reasonable then to maybe go to the student union, and most student unions would have an advocate that could assist you with regard to any sort of difficulties. And then once all the institution's internal processes are exhausted, you could certainly then seek outside assistance through external advocacy organisations such as Blind Citizens Australia or Vision Australia. Thanks, Ruby.
Thanks, Doug. And on that thread, even though it's not something that, it's been quite a critical stage if you were having to exhaust support outside the university system. But Bruce, I would like to get your take on, I guess, what does the process look like if a student was facing some type of discrimination and wanted to do something outside the university if they weren't satisfied? What type of channels do exist?
Well, thanks, Rini. Well, each sort of case is pretty unique, and it's important that students sort of who are thinking about using external mechanisms, for example, such as the Disability Discrimination Act, get really sort of good advice, and Vision Australia's and Blind Citizens Australia's advocacy services can assist with that. The external sort of processes that are available to help resolve issues generally work best if students have kind of pursued the various mechanisms that universities have, such as student ombudsmen and things like that. You don't have to have exhausted those processes before you look at external processes, and indeed, advocacy services like those provided by Vision Australia and Blind Citizens Australia are often useful while you're still pursuing the internal sort of mechanisms. But generally, the external sort of processes like the Disability Discrimination Act sort of come into play sort of towards the end of your sort of journey through the university's own mechanisms.
Thanks, Bruce. And we certainly, this session, because we have had a comment come through, and it's a very valid comment that anything that distracts from the education process, if you are facing a difficulty, yes, it does take time absolutely away from your study. So this is more around giving you an idea of what that process might look like. But we now know that from Jane's experience, it's really critical during that enrollment phase. The support person is really, really important, and being able to meet with your lecturers prior is also really important as well, just to get as much knowledge as possible. Doug, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. Just to add on what Jane was saying, certainly having a family member or a colleague to come along to a lot of those initial sessions when you're meeting with the disability service, when you're meeting with library staff, when you're going to the refectory or the cafeteria for the first time, just having somebody with you, because there's so much new information that you're getting. And obviously everybody knows that when you're orientating yourself to a new area, it's impossible to look at 10 different areas. You need to knock off 3 or 4 to start with. And if you've got a friend or a family member there for those first couple of sessions, it does take the stress out of it. Thanks, Rini.
Thanks, Doug. And as a student who is blind or has a vision impairment, Doug, what extra work should they contemplate after they've received an offer to a university compared to a student without a vision impairment?
Yeah, so I think certainly if they're studying on campus, try and come onto campus when it's quieter. Most of our academic semesters will start mid to late February. If you can be coming on, end of January, in February, early February, before it gets really busy, so that you can start to get a bit of an idea of the important routes around campus that you need to be able to complete. And also meeting some of the staff as early as possible. If you are blind or vision impaired, then it is certainly worthwhile making individual meetings with all of the staff that you're going to be dealing with. Now, some of them won't be available. Some of them, it might just be an email or a phone call. But certainly, if you think about the first lecture, where there might be 100 people or 200 people, and each of them are trying to sort of see the lecturer after the lecture's completed, it's hard for anybody to try and see that lecturer then. And as a vision impaired person, you've got no chance of trying to push to the front. So certainly making an individual time. So it does take a bit of extra time to get organised. And obviously just making certain that you are organised with all of your computer resources. It's really important, I'm sure Bruce and Jane would agree, is to have extra backup with regard to technologies. If you're using a laptop, make sure you're using one of the university machines as well, or have a spare computer at home as well, so that you've always got different backups of different technologies. Thanks, Ren.
Thanks, Doug. That's really useful. We're now going to move into looking, actually spending the studying experience at university, and particularly looking closer at what you might expect as a student who is blind or has low vision. Jane, what were the positive aspects of uni study for you, and did you find any negativities along the way?
Yeah, certainly. I had mixed experiences. I did have mostly positive experiences. I found that some of the greatest things about university were the friendships. So I formed a lot of friendships through on-campus living and even my courses. And there was an abilities collective at my university, which was for students with disability. So I formed a lot of friendships with peers through that. Probably the difficulties that I did come across were around getting my reasonable adjustments sometimes, whether that be getting my online learning to be proficient for my vision loss, or whether that be getting learning materials in the format that I needed them. And that involved troubleshooting, so going back to the lecturer or tutor and speaking to them about the difficulties I was facing, or going back to disability my disability advisor and saying, here's some of the difficulties I'm facing, how can we move forward with them?
Thanks so much, Jane. Now, Doug, what can a university, like I guess a university student, expect regarding getting their preferred format? Like if we're looking at their time frames, what's that experience like?
Rennie, if I can just touch on what Jane was talking about first with regard to getting your adjustments organised. And all institutions will have a process similar to a learning access plan, or it'll be called something similar. And basically the students like Jane or myself would meet with a disability advisor, and there would be a summary letter or application to the university that would list all the different sorts of accommodations and adjustments that you require. And that would then be disseminated out to staff, relevant staff, so that they know what you require. And one of the things that you've mentioned, Rennie, is obviously timeframes. Now, it's really important that students do disclose that they have a vision impairment or that they're blind in a reasonable time frame, so that the institution can get things organised for them, so that at day one, when everybody else is logging onto the learning management system, that the blind student is able to receive all their material in a preferred format. Usually these days it's all, the majority is certainly electronic. Students, as Bruce has said, students can change their mind and change their enrolments or their courses, but obviously institutions will have a bottleneck to get things organised in week one, because all of the students will want their material at that time. But certainly it is quite reasonable to expect that all institutions will have all of the required material ready at week one for the student. If there's recommended readings, then that's a bit different. Students may have to look through the reading lists and sit down with a librarian and sort of work out exactly what the materials are that they require. But certainly that's with regard to recommended readings, but certainly all the required information, textbooks, readings should be ready at week one, the same as any other student.
And would you recommend or know if a student, because having access to extracurricular information it's quite a normal part of the education experience, what is the wait time like, if or how should a student book some time with a librarian? Can you take us through that particular component?
So
Really important.
Certainly extracurricular activities such as activities at the student union or political things that are happening on campus, all students should have access to that at the same time. But certainly within the library, for example, there will be a lot of information that won't necessarily be fully accessible straight away.
Yep.
It may be that you need to liaise with your unit coordinators directly if there is a little bit of lag with some material, but certainly this day and age with regard to publishers are a lot quicker at getting electronic material organised for libraries. And as Bruce said, there will be times where you may need to copy a chapter and convert that yourself, just so that you can have some quick access to some of the material just to keep up. So certainly having some independence is a good thing, but certainly there will be times where you may need to liaise with the unit coordinator and just look at changing the timeframes on some of the assessments.
Thanks, Doug. Now we do have a question that's come through, and I'll read it out to the group, and I might hand it over to the panel to respond to. What happens when students don't have any family or friends available, no NDIS plan, and no money to put towards private carers? What government facilities are available, as I've tried in the past to get access through ability links to help with arrangements, and that has failed? Who would like to? The big one.
Yeah, no, certainly, Rennie, I'll have a little try. Certainly, it is an interesting situation if you do have a chronic vision impairment, but you don't, and you're not able to access any services through NDIS. I would hope that Vision Australia and Blind Citizens Australia could help you by linking in with a mentor. I know Jane and Bruce and I have spoken about this before, but having a mentor where somebody has gone through a similar course or has a similar level of vision, can be a big assistance. And Rennie, certainly what you did read, it does make it extremely difficult if you don't have support. You are still able to access the same supports at university, even if you don't have those carers or support plans through NDIS. So certainly I would still be contacting the disability advisors at the university, and they may have some other students that you may be able to link in with, or student groups.
Thanks, Doug. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to contribute to that question?
Thanks, Rennie. I just reinforce what Doug was saying, and that by contacting organisations like Vision Australia and Blind Citizens Australia, you can, find out about sort of other resources, because we do have sort of pretty good knowledge of what's available in different, in different sectors. So I think, and it's important to do that sort of as early as you can. I mean, don't sort of sit on problems of any, of any kind for longer than you need to. Contact organisations, contact disability advisors, and in most cases, we can assist you sort of improve the situation.
Thanks, Bruce. And yeah, if anyone is listening tonight and you're finding that you do have a personal advocacy matter around the university experience, but you're not too comfortable to share it via this channel, that's completely okay. Please send us an email to campaigns@visionaustralia.org, and we'll be able to take that offline and respond to you personally.
I might also mention, Rennie, just while we're talking about advocacy, that Vision Australia does have a guide to self-advocacy called Stand Up for Your Rights in Tertiary Education, and that guide is available on Vision Australia's website. So if you go to visionaustralia.org and do a search for tertiary education, you should find that, and that goes through a lot of basic strategies and options you have when you want to be advocating for yourself at university.
That's a really useful tool, isn't it, Bruce? It's got all the steps you might want to consider taking, as well as templates, where you might want to put your time in terms of choosing your battles. And if you are listening and that Stand Up for Your Rights, guys, does appeal to you, we'll go one step even easier. We're going to include a link to that comprehensive resource following this webinar in case you're not able to find it. I'd now like to look at a bit more around Vision Australia's online learning research. And Bruce, can you tell us some of the barriers that university students have experienced who are blind or have low vision in the online space?
Thanks, Rini. Well, the two numbers to keep in mind when thinking about our online learning research are 34 and 35. 35 is the number of participants who responded to a short survey that we designed in 2017 to kind of capture information about students' experiences with online learning systems. And online learning systems are things, like websites, discussion boards, recorded lectures, participating in tutorials online, submitting assignments via online sort of platforms, all of the kinds of things that characterize the way learning is delivered now by pretty much all universities, not just for students who are on campus, but also students who are sort of studying by distance education. So 35 is the number of students who responded to our survey. 34 is the number of students who were experiencing significant barriers when accessing online learning sort of platforms. And those barriers can be sort of divided into three main groups. The first group of barriers that we identified were barriers where the online learning platform itself was designed in such a way that it was inaccessible to people who used screen reader or screen enlargement technology, things like JAWS, Zoom Text, and so forth. And typically the reason that these systems are inaccessible or very difficult to access, or where sort of major components of them are inaccessible, is because they don't comply with recognised international accessibility guidelines, such as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is now up to version 2.1. The second group of barriers was around disability services staff who didn't know how assistive technology interfaced with the online learning systems, and so weren't able to give students advice about, how best to use them, or were difficult to contact or unwilling to sort of provide assistance. And the third group of barriers were caused by lecturers and tutors and other course delivery staff who were unwilling to kind of change the format of their content. For example, who wouldn't change from image-only PDFs to more text-based resources, or who wouldn't use the standards that the university itself had for how to upload content to the online learning platform, and so forth. I mean, there were, in each of those major groups, there were sort of subgroups, but I won't confuse the issue by going into those at the moment. The important thing was that the research sort of corroborated the anecdotal evidence that we had that many students were experiencing barriers due to the lack of planning by the university sector as it's been transitioning to an online learning delivery mode.
Thanks, Bruce. It does sound like a really a huge body of work, and I understand that it came off the back of students contacting Vision Australia's advocacy team after they were experiencing some issues. So what sort of work has that research then helped Vision Australia do with that? What have we done with that results?
Yeah, well, thanks, Rini. We have been sort of advocating to a number of different bodies since we published the research in towards the end of 2018. We've had discussions with the Commonwealth Government around funding for universities to provide accessibility in its, in the platforms that universities use. We've had discussions with bodies such as Universities Australia, that represents most of the universities. We've had discussions with individual universities around the kinds of issues that they face when looking at how to make their online learning environments accessible. We've also, I guess, been able to kind of distill some ideas and insights as to the kinds of things that students can do to not necessarily eliminate the barriers, but at least put themselves in the best position to deal with them. And I'm happy to talk about that a little later.
Thanks, Bruce. And that's the thing, what you've touched on around that it is quite a complex area around how we go about making lasting change across universities. So the likelihood of sometimes coming against a barrier, whether it's online or something completely different, is still likely. Now, Doug, if a student does come against a barrier while they're studying at university, what should they do?
Yeah. And certainly Bruce has sort of touched on, obviously, the changing nature of learning management systems. Every university has a different learning management system, and they do change often, and it is confusing for the average student, let alone any student using assistive technology, including those that are blind or vision impaired. Sometimes staff will make mistakes and they won't even realise with regard to making information inaccessible. Certainly a lot of staff will be more than happy to talk it over with the students, find another option, strategy that will suffice. Instead of logging onto the management system, maybe the staff member shoots that information directly to the students, and then so that the student keeps on track time-wise. But certainly, as you mentioned, Rennie, if there are issues, if a student is finding that a staff member isn't budging, certainly I would be coming back to the disability advisor, as I mentioned before, because the disability advisor should be well placed to have a discussion with that staff member and just explain that certainly what the student is asking is quite appropriate and it's not out of the ordinary. If there's a budget implication, then that's nothing to do with the student. That's up to the disability advisor and the staff member to work out. And as we mentioned before, if it does take a bit of extra time for you to get that material, then it's quite reasonable to talk to the unit coordinator and talk about a different time frame. Obviously, you don't want that to compound and sort of move in towards the examinations, but certainly it is quite reasonable to ask for a bit of extra time. Or in some situations, it might even be an alternative piece of assessment. So, say there's a multiple choice question quiz online, which is quite difficult for most people with vision impairment. The staff member might think, well, let's look at an alternative piece of assessment that meets the same learning outcomes. Thanks, Rennie.
Thanks, Doug. And I think what you've mentioned is what really rings true is around keeping that that dialogue open about what your needs are, because that particular student's needs is they're the expert in being able to articulate that and being able to raise that with the person responsible or the persons, because there is a lot of responsibility making sure a student progress is there. And I loved how you've highlighted how that personal advocacy is so important. Now, we've had a question come through that I'd like to read out, and I think, Bruce, I'd love to get your thoughts on it before we open it up to the rest of the panel. How do you overcome research taking so long because of an inability to skim read, but audio text doesn't exactly work as what is being read is from a medical textbook, so therefore has references all over the place and becomes very confusing and hard to remember the information?
Yes, thanks, Rena. I'm happy to open the batting on this one. I think the key is to try and anticipate what you're going to need and when you're going to need it, so you've got access to all of the resources you need, so you're not having to spend sort of time when you should be doing assignments and things trying to access the the research material. I think another important aspect is to be really sort of comfortable using whatever technology you're using, so that you can get the maximum benefit from the formats that you do have access to. And I think the other thing is to make sure that if you are encountering issues, you don't sort of, going back to something I said earlier, you don't sort of sit on it, that you kind of talk to disability advisors and staff who can who can assist you, because there may be alternative ways that they can suggest that you haven't thought of, that will save you a lot of time. So Doug and Jane may have other things to add to that.
Rennie, certainly, as Bruce has mentioned, it seems quite a specialised question, and the disability advisors won't know every answer, but they will have access to a national list of disability advisors where we could put up a question and say, we've got a blind student who is having issues reading medical texts. Is there somebody else out there in the same situation? And the really good thing these days, obviously with Skype and email, is you can put people in contact from all over the world. A very similar type scenario was, I was thinking about blind lawyers who are vision impaired, who have to try and skim read copious amounts of information. So it is just not possible to read everything, and they do need to skim read. And it is an art form that you do get to learn. And I think it is sometimes really good to talk to other people who have done a similar course with a similar level of vision, just to find out how they'd completed it. Thanks, Jane.
Jane, did you have anything else to add?
Yes, I do. I would have to agree, particularly with Bruce saying about anticipation is a really big factor in this. Whatever you can work out beforehand, as far in advance as possible, to get made into a different format. For example, maybe there's something that adaptive technology specialists that might be, for example, in disability services, might know something that can convert it into a format that's more compatible with the particular assistive tech you're using. One thing that I did, particularly when I got into postgraduate research, was I'd settled into university well and truly by this point. So what I would do is, before the semester actually started, I would see my disability advisor, get the learning materials ready and organised, and start reading before the semester even started, because it was one way that I could definitely keep up with the coursework as it came in, because it did take longer.
Wow, I mean, that is incredibly organised as well, Jane. And the fact that you're able to make that extra time to be able to get ahead of the game, so that you could actually go through the university experience as smoothly as possible. I think that's really good feedback. Getting back to the online research, Bruce, and I think we have discussed a lot around the barriers, but it is such an important body of work, and I know that in its application, it's really useful for students as well. So I just wanted to double check if you had anything else you wanted to add, Bruce, around how students can minimize the impact of barriers.
I think that, thanks, Rennie. I think the important thing that we found in our research is that it's really valuable for students to spend as much time as they can researching the online learning system before they start. And by researching the online learning system, I mean finding out what system the university is using. Is it Blackboard? Is it Moodle? Is it Canvas? Is it sort of some other system? Talk to disability advisors about what they know about the interface between the assistive technology that you'll be using, like JAWS or NVDA, and that system. Find out, if you can, whether other blind or vision impaired students have used that system with the same technology that you're planning to use, and find out if you can actually have a try of the system before you start. Some universities, particularly at the postgraduate level where there aren't as many students normally, will sort of be able to arrange for you to have a try of, say, a Blackboard, discussion board, or a Canvas sort of discussion room or whatever they're called, and that will allow you to find out how well or not so well you can use that system. You can't always do that. Some universities are sort of more accommodating to those kinds of requests than others, but if you can find out as much as you can about the system before you start, then the more prepared you'll be to address sort of the barriers that might arise.
And Bruce, if there is a student listening tonight who does decide to take up that idea of understanding which online platforms are available at their preferred university, what is possibly a better online platform that they should keep an eye out for, and which ones have we found in that research that might not be as accessible?
Thanks, Randy. The situation's changing sort of all the time, particularly in the last 2 years. Even since we did our research in 2017, there've been some changes in the accessibility of some online learning sort of platforms. So what is the most accessible or most inaccessible today may not necessarily be the most accessible or inaccessible at the time that you actually want to start start university. So I think rather than try to name specific sort of platforms, my sort of advice would be, once you've decided your subjects, once you have a pretty good idea of which university you want to go to, contact the disability advisor at that university and ask them, and go through the steps that I mentioned, and by all means, feel free to contact sort of Vision Australia or Blind Citizens Australia and ask us, if we've got any updated information that might be of benefit to you.
That's a great idea, particularly because the landscape is constantly changing. And we've got an interesting and I think a valuable comment that's come through, not a question, but I think we can explore this a little bit further. The comment is, given the extra time that organising these adjustments take, I found reducing my study load in the first year helped. Does anyone have any experience around, when you have entered the university experience as a full-time student, we'll say, that there is that flexibility of being able to change your lifestyle so that you can keep up with the demands of university?
Rennie, I'll start. Certainly, I work with a full cross-section of students with all types of disabilities, and that's a really good statement that somebody has raised there, that for a student with a vision impairment, there is nothing wrong with contemplating part-time study. Certainly a lot of students handle full-time study, they handle it very well, but there's nothing wrong with thinking, okay, well, I've got into this course, it does have the option of part-time, I might just start off with doing 2 subjects instead of 4, and just getting myself settled with the different learning management systems, as Bruce has mentioned. Rennie, your question to Bruce was interesting, which was, what are the best learning management systems? That's all very well, but suddenly, as Bruce said, it might change when you get there, and suddenly you've got a new system you need to learn. So having a lesser load of units in your first year or 2 is not such a bad thing, just to get yourself settled.
Thanks, Doug.
And I would add to that, yeah, I think certainly, it's something that should be considered. I have gone part-time at times during my study, especially when I had major eye surgeries. So I think that also, if you have a change of circumstances, it's something that's really valuable to do, just to take the pressure off yourself a bit and to make it a bit easy to manage everything. But absolutely, that first year, I think it's a very valuable thing that you could do just to make it a bit easier to transition to university.
Thanks, Jane. And I think it's really common these days for any students to, to get the university to meet your lifestyle needs. Doug, I've got a question that I'd also love some more information on, and that is, what is a disability access plan?
Yeah, so certainly all universities will have their version of a learning access plan or a disability access plan with regard to a student's particular supports and adjustments. Some of them will be 6 months, 12 months. It's interesting to explain that just because a person is blind and it might be a permanent situation doesn't mean their plan is going to be permanent, because most disability advisors will want to meet with a student again after 12 months or 24 months, review that plan, tweak it a little bit. Technologies change, different subjects change, the support requirements. So most students will sit down with a disability advisor, hopefully before semester 1 starts. They'll look at the types of units that you're going to be enrolling in, look at the requirements that you're going to need. It'll be an application process to the university, and the end product will be usually a letter that is sent out to relevant staff, and the student will also take a copy of that out and discuss that with staff. We are presuming that a lot of staff have never worked with a blind student before, so quite often the information in that disability access plan will provide the information for that tutor or unit coordinator, so that they understand what is required from their point of view. So it might be access to assistive software in a computer laboratory, timeframes for material, and just as importantly, a lot of units at university have end of semester examinations where there are timed, supervised situations where students need to produce material. So, exams are an important part of university, but all disability services do provide alternative arrangements where the students are still sitting the same examination, but whether it be using braille or electronic or large print, with extra time, resting time, they would meet the same requirements as other students. Thanks, Rennie.
Thank you so much, Doug. We've got I love this question because I think it's very relevant to lots of students, particularly for students who are blind or low vision. What are your suggestions for trying to work and study at the same time when university work consumes so much time? Jane, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things for this is around just organisation, around prioritising. So I'm a big list writer. I like having things in a sort of order. So I put, what is coming up first at the top of that list and work down in priority just to make sure I'm knocking off things. And I think also finding times in the day where you can knock off little things. So you might be in a waiting room for an appointment. You can do a little bit of study there. Might be commuting somewhere and can listen to some lectures or find ways to build it into your day otherwise. It's certainly a challenging thing to do, and I understand many university students are working as well as studying. But I think it's just a matter of being able to prioritise and organise to be able to make it all work.
Rennie, if I can add to what Jane is saying, employment, part-time employment for people who are vision impaired while they're studying is really complicated, because you can't waitress, you can't stack shelves at Woolworths. It is difficult to find part-time employment. However, all universities will have a career service, and certainly go and talk to them. For example, at our university, I know we have quite a few students that are being employed to act within the call centres, not the usual call centres, but to do specialist follow-up programs. Now, there's no reason why, with the appropriate assistive software, that a blind student couldn't be doing one of those jobs. So certainly it is difficult to find good, valuable employment while you're at university, but certainly talk to your career service. Every university would have one, and see what options may be available.
And I would just follow on the back of that to say that I did some reception work when I was studying, and that enabled me to actually do some work sometimes when people weren't coming to the counter, as well as managing my study at the same time. So it ended up being quite a good fit for me. So, and that was found through talking to career advice.
That's fantastic. Bruce, did you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, thanks, Rennie. When I was completing my master's degree, and admittedly that was in the days before online learning sort of became so prominent, I was working full time, and in the last year I have pretty much had to study full time so that I could complete the course before they sort of withdrew some of the subjects that I wanted to study. And one of the things that really helped me was to talk to my employer about sort of options for for study leave a couple of weeks before before exams or major assignments. I mean, each employer will have its own policy around that, but again, sort of to kind of emphasize a theme that that's been recurring throughout the the webinar this evening, that is share things about about what's going on with you. Talk to your employer, talk to the university, and between the three of you, you're more likely to be able to come up with a solution that's that's going to work for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely a key theme that's been coming up, is really articulating what your needs are to be able to get the best experience possible. We've got a question that I'd love to get your feedback on. We'll start with Doug, and that is, I was wondering if the special provisions that are available for university students with disabilities during exams can be the same as those available in secondary school. Did you have any thoughts on that one, Doug?
Yes, definitely, Rennie. Each state has a different assessment process with regard to years 11 and 12. There isn't as much consistency as possibly there could be. We've actually found here that the university can be quite flexible with regard to examination accommodations. So certainly, as Jane mentioned at the very start, when you do leave college, make sure you take as much documentation with you as possible. So if you've got reports, assessments, accommodations that you had in year 11 and 12 examinations, take copies of those reports with you before you go to university. When you have that first interview with the disability office, if you can have that information with you, that will make their task a lot easier. And certainly, I think universities, because they are a rule unto themselves, they do have a little bit more flexibility whilst ensuring that academic rigour is kept. So obviously that means that just because you are vision impaired, you're not getting an advantage over your peers. So if the class has a closed book exam, then you've still got a closed book exam as well, but you might be doing it on a computer with a bit of extra writing time. So you're still meeting the same academic milestones and the same academic rigour as your peers. So certainly, Rennie, in summary, yes, the universities can certainly offer the same accommodations that you had in years 11 and 12, and to some extent may even be able to be a little bit more flexible, but certainly the disability service will talk to you about that individually.
Thanks, Doug. That was a really useful and comprehensive response, I feel. Jane, I remember early on that you spoke around the value of bringing a support person when you go through some of the university experience and you're meeting with lecturers and staff and whatnot. Can you describe also, I guess, the value of peer support groups at university? Sorry, Jane, we can't hear you. Hello.
Rennie, do you want me to answer that question?
Looks like there's just like a little bit of a disconnect, and we've got a couple of minutes left. So, yep, Doug, I'll throw that over to you. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I'm sure that Jane would agree that peer support at university is really, really important, not just for people who are blind or vision impaired, but I'm going to generalise that students with disabilities in general will get a lot of support from each other. Just knowing that you're not the only one that's finding it difficult to do certain tasks. Obviously, to find another blind student in the same course isn't always going to happen. But if you can, just catching up with them now and then. You don't have to be best friends necessarily, but just a level of collegiality that can make a huge difference on just knowing how that other person got through, what they did, what they found was supportive and constructive, and that can make a huge difference. When I went through university many years ago, there was a quite a strong student group which lobbied for different resources on campus. We probably don't have as active a student voice anymore, because I think universities have in general improved a lot over the last 20 years. We have much greater access to technology these days, but certainly it doesn't mean that it makes it easy for all students. And just being able to sit down and having a coffee with somebody or going to a student meeting, I think is still a very important aspect. Renee, yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Doug. That was some really useful insight. We're actually come to the end of our webinar, and I don't think it's even possible for me to try and summarize all the amazing content that was done tonight, but I will do my best. We spoke about the importance of starting the preparation process early as Year 10 in terms of mapping out the needs that you might require through the university experience and utilizing your NDIS plan to make that happen. We also spoke about ADCET. I'm not going to say that right, ADCET, and we'll include a link in our follow-up email around finding the pre-planning toolkit to help you on that journey, as well as talking to Vision Australia. We have a bursary program that can assist with your needs. We spoke about the value of being able to articulate your needs quite early on in the process, even before you start university. Find out which universities come to mind and see if you can have your mobility orientation earlier on, as well as meeting up with lecturers and even taking that extra mile to find out from universities what their online platforms look like, and perhaps even doing a test to see if it suits your needs. There was a strong theme tonight around being able to be comfortable with articulating and your needs and knowing that that's your right. You know, you are a university student and you have the right to have an equal experience and a nourishing experience at university. So articulating that to your respective disability advisor and making sure that if you do need support and you're not getting it, such as your accessible formats in time or whatnot, being able to be persistent with following up. I know that there was so much more useful information shared tonight. And we will be sending, following this webinar, a link to the recording as well as some of the resources that we spoke about, including our Stand Up for Your Rights guides, which has a lot of information. I would love to thank our panelists tonight, Bruce Maguire, Jane Britt, Doug Majin, for your valuable time, as well as to our listeners. I hope you gained some useful tips. And my name is Renee, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
3 navy blue linked ovals form capital letters V and A within a bright yellow rectangle.